Nixon and Vietnam. Come the actual presidential election of 1968, we're going to see that this election really was closer than Humphrey had any right to hope for. Um, Many people were unwilling to vote for a third party or Wallace, even if they liked him. And Nixon is going to come on top because of all this. Nixon really appealed to the white middle class. And he also claimed that he had a secret plan to end the dreaded Vietnam War. Nixon will use all of the increasing fears of crime and street violence and race riots, etc., to basically split a lot of worried white voters away from the Democratic Party. In the end of this election, we see Wallace has 13.5% of the popular vote. Humphrey has 42.7% of the popular vote and 191 electoral votes. And Nixon has 43.4% of the popular vote and 301 electoral votes. Nixon, quite frankly, he's an unlikely politician. He was really ill at ease in the public eye, and he really has an inferiority complex. The thing is, you have to keep in mind, Nixon had been vice president for 8 years back under Eisenhower. But then in 1962, after he's been the vice president, he actually lost in a race to be California governor. But come 1968, he basically still sells this like so-called new Nixon to the media. Although 7 years later, we're going to see the press and the media are going to be his undoing with the whole Watergate scandal and everything. Here's the thing. When you bring up the name Nixon, generally students tend to think Watergate. That's the first word association a lot of people think of. But I want you to, for a second, erase Watergate from your mind. Erase what you know what's going to happen at the end of Nixon's presidency. Because a lot of his dishonesty and issues during presidency, as well as the whole Watergate scandal, tend to obscure his administration's accomplishments. We are going to see Nixon's administration reduces tensions in the Cold War. He will reluctantly upgrade the civil rights enforcement by like setting goals for like minority hiring by federal contractors. And he's going to preside over an impressive environmental legislation. But the first thing he has to deal with is Vietnam. So after 1968, things are just getting worse in Vietnam. And as much as Nixon told people, I have a plan, a secret plan to end the Vietnam War, yeah, he had no secret plan to end the war. He did not have a plan. And so we're seeing opposition against the war intensifying, especially with the revelation that United States soldiers had like slaughtered hundreds of like men, women, and children in specifically the South Vietnamese village of My Lai after failing to find any Viet Cong. Which, keep in mind, the Viet Cong a lot of times included women and children, which makes this war really awkward and everything. The thing is, with the fact that we have soldiers killing women and children, innocent and guilty alike on some level, this shows that a lot of Americans felt like the United States had strayed from all of its ideals back from like World War II. The thing is, we're also seeing dissatisfaction mounting in Vietnam itself. Racial tensions would sap morale on the front lines. A lot of troops lost discipline, took drugs, hunkered down, just waiting for their tours of duty to end. So we have this anti-war opposition in Vietnam and at home, and partly because of this, we're seeing Nixon trying to reduce the role of United States ground forces. We're also seeing a kind of new left at this time that splits up into factions against the Vietnam War. So a lot of protests against the Vietnam War were focusing on like peace work, draft resistance, other kinds of efforts. But others become much more violent after about 1968. It'd be things like window smashing in cities like Chicago and Washington. We have some protesters even try to blow themselves up with a homemade bomb in 1970 in New York. Others robbed like a Boston bank. We get the bombing of the University of Wisconsin, a building there that actually ended up killing a student. And so a reaction to all of this protest, and especially this protest becoming violent, is going to be Vietnamization. Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird is the one who puts this together, and Vietnamization was basically the withdrawing of American troops as fast as possible from Vietnam, but without undermining the South Vietnamese government. In a way, Vietnamization really ties into what's going to become known as the Nixon Doctrine. The Nixon Doctrine is going to be established in July of 1969, and basically it was this idea that the United States would help other countries fight their wars, but with like weapons and with money, but not with soldiers, not with men. So it's substituting machines for men. And so we're trying to pull out as many troops as quickly as possible from Vietnam without undermining the South Vietnamese government, but substituting machines and money in their place. So the United States in this way is rearming. It's going to enlarge the South Vietnamese army, and on top of that, it's going to start surreptitiously bombing communist bases in neutral Cambodia. A lot of the Ho Chi Minh Trail that was bringing items to South Vietnam from North Vietnam to like support the Viet Cong and stuff like that actually went through Cambodia, but Cambodia technically was a neutral agent. It is going to be revealed that America got involved in Cambodia, which they were not supposed to be doing so, on May 9th of 1969 in the New York Times. This is going to be part of like the whole like Pentagon Papers and everything that we're going to get to later, and it's going to be important come Watergate much, much later. This secret war with Cambodia also culminated in about April 30th of 1970, so about a year after it's been revealed. A lot of this was aiming to like smash the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese bases, basically allow time to like rebuild the South Vietnamese army. But Americans are outraged at home. Americans are outraged because they had hoped that the Vietnam War was fading, that it was coming to an end, and instead America has on some level increased war by landing in Cambodia, for example. And so we see a lot of young people in particular protesting at this time, and we get universities and colleges literally being shut down by student protesters. In fact, the National Guard is called in to maintain order in Kent State University in Ohio, and the thing is, students would taunt them and they'd toss bottles at them, and then you have this whole recent record of violence with a lot of extreme leftists in this time that put them on edge. And on May 4th of 1970, one of these units fired on a group of young people and killed 4 of them. We see something similar happen at Jackson State University down in Mississippi. 2 students would be killed by troops firing on a dormitory. But then we're going to see a change happen in December of 1969, December of 1969, we're going to start seeing an easing of some of this pressure, partly because we get a new lottery system for determining the order of draft calls, and it's by basically birthdays. And this is actually the document I had you look at and figure out what number you would have been drafted by. And the thing is, what that did is it let about 2/3 of men in the United States know that, oh, they're not going to be drafted. And so a lot of people at that point aren't going to feel the need to protest anymore, because a lot of the protests were aimed at the draft more than anything else. Then in December of 1970, Congress is going to repeal the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution and basically prohibit the use of United States ground forces outside of South Vietnam. The problem is, as much as this is great in this moment, it was basically too little too late when it came to Cambodia. Cambodia was basically devastated by the United States invasion already. This had helped destabilize their government, and it basically opened up the way for Khmer Rouge to come in, who would go on to kill millions of Cambodians in the name of a working class revolution. Still, the United States is going to continue to pull troops out of Vietnam. In fact, by 1972, America only has about 90,000 United States troops in Vietnam. And we'll get the final air offensive in December of that year, smashing Hanoi to rubble and forcing 4.5 years of peace talks to come to conclusion. In fact, we get a ceasefire on January 27th of 1973, which is confirming the United States withdrawal from Vietnam. Basically, during those peace talks, the United States is going to promise not to increase military aid to South Vietnam. However, what this meant is there was no solid guarantee for the South Vietnamese government to stay in charge. And at that point, we also see Nixon suspending the draft in favor of an all-volunteer military. In 1975, South Vietnam will collapse. Basically, you had all these different political groups, ethnic groups, and religious factions together in South Vietnam, and really only the United States presence there had held all of them together. And so now that America was out, they crumbled. And then in the spring of 1975, the North Vietnamese are going to open another offensive against South Vietnam. And any morale at that point basically evaporated, and you get resistance crumbling, and basically the United States has to completely evacuate like their embassy in Saigon. This is known as the fall of Saigon, and so we see evacuations of Saigon by helicopter, and a lot of South Vietnamese people tried to join in this flee from their nation. We get a lot of Vietnamese refugees come to different areas of America with the fall of Saigon. And in fact, one such group actually came to Arlington, Texas. And so that's one reason that we see a lot of certain Vietnamese populations and groups in certain areas is from this specific event a lot of times. Also, you'll see here, so this is kind of like the storming of the United States Embassy, as so many people tried to escape and were trying to get out via helicopter and with the American military help on the right side. And on the left side, the thing is, there was only so many aircraft carriers, and there wasn't room for all of the helicopters being used to get as many people out as possible. And so you can see here that a lot of times they would have to shove helicopters off of these aircraft carriers into the ocean just to make room for new helicopters to land afterwards. And so it's a really interesting, you can go find some videos of all of this on YouTube if you want. So I ask you this, knowing that it's in retrospect, but how do you think Vietnam should have been handled?